It is a Tuesday afternoon in the spring of 1965, and a retired farmer from Bentonville, Arkansas, is doing his weekly shopping at the local Walmart. He has a bag of feed in his trolley, a tin of coffee, a new pair of work gloves. He turns into the sporting goods section and stops so abruptly that the tin of coffee rolls forward and nearly falls off the front of the trolley. Behind the counter, lying across two wooden pegs on the wall above the ammunition shelf, is a machine gun. Not a rifle, not a shotgun. A belt-fed, water-cooled, tripod-mounted .30 caliber medium machine gun, the weapon that American soldiers carried from the Meuse-Argonne offensive of 1918 through the frozen nightmare of the Chosin Reservoir in 1950. The weapon that held the line on 100 beaches, 1,000 ridgelines, 10,000 yards of wire, and mud and blood that history recorded, and the men who survived it mostly did not discuss. The blued steel receiver, the distinctive jacket perforations, the brass feed cover. The price card leaning against it reads $11.95. He served in the Pacific. He knows this weapon intimately. He knows the sound it makes at 450 rounds per minute, and the smell of the overheated water jacket, and the weight of the ammunition cans that his loader carried across Peleliu in September 1944, without complaint until the day he stopped carrying anything at all. The farmer stands there for a long time. What he is looking at is the Browning M 1917. A1, one of the most consequential machine gun designs in the history of warfare. 5 million Browning machine guns in all variants were built. They were sold at Walmart for $11.95, and then the law of 1968 ended it. This is that story. To understand why 5 million Browning machine guns ended up in American retail stores, one must begin with the most catastrophic failure of military technology in the history of the industrialized world, the machine gun crisis of the Western Front in 1914 and 1915, and America's particular and humiliating version of that crisis when it entered the war in April 1917. The problem was devastatingly simple. The United States Army that crossed to France in 1917 was equipped with virtually no machine guns whatsoever. The Army's procurement bureaucracy had spent the preceding years in a state of institutional paralysis that, in hindsight, borders on criminal negligence, while French and British and German armies had equipped their infantry with crew-served automatic weapons in numbers that had transformed the tactical landscape of modern warfare beyond recognition. The American army arrived in France with approximately 1,500 machine guns of various types, a figure so inadequate for a force of the size contemplated that the French, who were supplying American units with Chosin automatic rifles to compensate, found the situation difficult to discuss without visible discomfort. The machine guns that did exist in American service were a bewildering collection of incompatible systems. The Bennet Mercier, adopted in 1909, had proven difficult to operate in darkness, a failing that became nationally notorious when a squad of cavalrymen on the Mexican border in 1916 were unable to bring it into action during a night raid. The Hotchkiss M 1914, supplied by the French, was adequate but dependent on French ammunition and French spare parts. The Vickers, supplied by the British, was excellent, but produced in Britain and similarly dependent on external supply chains. None of these weapons could be manufactured in the United States in the quantities that a modern army required. The solution required a completely American machine gun, one that could be manufactured by American industry, fed by American ammunition, maintained by American armourers, and produced in the millions rather than the thousands. The existing alternatives were each inadequate in ways that the European experience had made painfully clear. A belt-fed weapon was essential. The strip-fed Bennet Mercier and the strip-fed Hotchkiss were simply too slow to reload under fire. Water cooling was necessary for the sustained fire rates that defensive positions demanded. Air-cooled weapons of the period overheated after a few hundred rounds and required barrel changes that exposed the crew to fire. Reliability in mud, rain, cold, and the absolute mechanical abuse of sustained combat was non-negotiable. Weapons that jammed under adverse conditions were not merely useless but actively dangerous, drawing enemy fire toward positions that could no longer return it. The Army turned to the one American designer whose record suggested he could solve all of these requirements simultaneously. John Moses Browning had designed firearms with the same systematic genius he brought to everything else since the 1880s. Working initially from his workshop in Ogden, Utah, and subsequently through his long and productive relationship with Colt's Patent Firearms Manufacturing Company in Hartford, Connecticut. His approach to the machine gun problem drew on a principle he had been developing for years: the use of propellant gas to operate the weapon's mechanism, tapping energy that was otherwise wasted to perform the automatic functions of extraction, ejection, and chambering. The mechanism Browning devised for what would become the Model 1917 was a short recoil, operated, belt-fed, water-cooled design of considerable elegance. When a cartridge was fired, the barrel and bolt recoiled together for a short distance inside the receiver, the bolt then being rotated to unlock from the barrel extension and continuing rearward alone, under recoil energy, extracting and ejecting the spent case and cocking the firing mechanism. The return spring drove the bolt forward again, stripping the next cartridge from the fabric belt and chambering it, whilst the barrel returned to battery simultaneously. The entire cycle produced a cyclic rate of approximately 450 rounds per minute, deliberate, controllable, and sustainable in a way that higher-rate weapons were not. The water jacket surrounding the barrel, a cylindrical steel container holding approximately 3.5 litres of water, absorbed the heat generated by sustained fire, boiling eventually and requiring replenishment, but allowing the weapon to fire thousands of rounds continuously without the barrel damage that destroyed air-cooled weapons. At the demonstration before the Army's board on the 17th of June, 1917 in Washington, D.C., Browning's prototype fired 20,000 rounds without a single malfunction. The board members, who had arrived expecting to sit through the standard series of demonstration stoppages and excuses, sat in complete silence. They had never seen anything like it. The Model 1917 was adopted immediately. Production was contracted to Colt in Hartford, to Remington Arms in Ilion, New York, and to the New England Westinghouse Company in Springfield, Massachusetts. Total production of the M1917 in the First World War reached approximately 56,608 weapons before the armistice, a fraction of what was needed, but enough to prove the design in combat. The improved M1917A1, with a more robust tripod and various detail refinements, became the standard American medium machine gun of the Second World War. Production of the M1917 A1 during the Second World War was distributed across multiple facilities, including Saginaw Steering Gear Division of General Motors in Saginaw, Michigan, which became the largest single producer, and the Rock Island Arsenal in Illinois. The M1919 series, an air-cooled variant developed from the M1917 mechanism for use in vehicles and aircraft, added enormously to the total Browning production figure. The 5 million figure cited in surplus accounts reflects total production across all Browning machine gun variants, including the M1917, M1917A1, M1919A4, and M1919A6, across both World Wars and the Korean War period, a figure for which complete consolidated records across all manufacturers are not readily available in public archives, though the broad scale of production is well documented. The weapon measured 96.5 centimetres overall and weighed 14.97 kilograms without the tripod, the tripod itself adding another 23.86 kilograms, giving the complete weapon system a combined weight of approximately 47 kilograms, including a full water jacket and ammunition. It was not a weapon one man could carry. It was a weapon that crews of 3 to 6 men operated, maintained and served with the organised efficiency of a well-drilled team. In combat, the Browning M1917A A1 provided the sustained automatic fire capability that American infantry tactics had been built around since the lessons of the Western Front had been absorbed into doctrine. At Belleau Wood in June 1918, Marine Corps units equipped with M1917 Brownings, among the first delivered to American forces in France, used the weapon's sustained fire capability to break German counterattacks that had repulsed earlier assaults. Veterans of Belleau Wood described the psychological effect on German infantry of the Browning's distinctive cadence, the deliberate, measured 450 rounds per minute that experienced soldiers recognised as a different proposition entirely from the frantic, unsustainable rates of lesser weapons. On Peleliu, in September 1944, Marines of the 1st Marine Division operating M1917A, won positions in the coral ridges of Amurbrogol Mountain, used the weapon's water-cooled sustainability to maintain fire through the Japanese counterattacks that came at night, with the reliability of tide, the water jacket steaming in the tropical heat, ammunition carriers moving through fire to replenish belts, the weapon firing until the barrel glowed and the water boiled and still it fired. In the Hurtgen Forest in November and December 1944, American soldiers, in one of the most miserable and costly battles of the European campaign, used M1917A, won positions to anchor defensive lines in conditions of rain and mud and cold that defeated virtually every other mechanical system they carried. The water-cooled mechanism, paradoxically, was more tolerant of the extreme cold than air-cooled alternatives. The water jacket insulating the barrel from temperature extremes that caused metal to contract and mechanisms to bind. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. The German equivalent to the Browning M1917A1 was the MG34 and its successor the MG42, weapons that represented a fundamentally different philosophy of machine gun employment and produced a direct tactical contrast that military historians have examined in considerable detail. The MG42, introduced in 1942, fired at a cyclic rate of approximately 1,200 rounds per minute, more than 2.5 times the Browning's 450. The sound it produced was so distinctive, a tearing, canvas-ripping sound quite unlike any other weapon, that Allied soldiers gave it the nickname Hitler's buzzsaw. And the psychological effect of its rate of fire on troops encountering it for the first time was documented by unit commanders across every theatre where it was deployed. The MG42 weighed 11.57 kilograms, considerably lighter than the M1917A1, and used an air-cooled quick-change barrel system that allowed sustained fire through rapid barrel replacement, rather than water cooling. The practical comparison between the two approaches produced genuinely mixed results depending on circumstances. The MG42's higher rate of fire was devastating in the opening seconds of an engagement and psychologically overwhelming at close range. Its quick-change barrel system was faster than replenishing a water jacket in many tactical situations. But its ammunition consumption at 1,200 rounds per minute was voracious. A full 250-round belt lasted approximately 12 seconds at cyclic rate. And its dependence on barrel changes under fire created vulnerability that well-trained opponents could exploit. The Browning's slower rate was more ammunition efficient, its water-cooled sustained fire capability more reliable in prolonged defensive engagements, and its mechanism more tolerant of the extreme conditions of sustained combat. The British Vickers machine gun, itself derived from the Maxim design that had armed European armies since the 1880s, was in many respects comparable to the Browning M1917A1, also water-cooled, also belt-fed, also firing at approximately 450 rounds per minute. The Vickers had an operational record stretching back to the First World War that gave it a proven reliability the newer Browning could not yet match in 1917. British gunnery teams at Arras in August 1916 had fired 1 million rounds through 10 Vickers guns in 12 hours of continuous fire to support an infantry assault, a demonstration of sustained fire capability that became the benchmark against which all subsequent machine guns were measured. By the late 1950s, with the M60 general-purpose machine gun entering American service, and the Army transitioning away from the water-cooled medium machine gun concept entirely, surplus M1917, A1s began their journey from arsenal storage to the retail market. Walmart were founded by Sam Walton in Rogers, Arkansas, on July 2, 1962, and expanding through small-town America at a pace that reflected Walton's precise understanding of the retail needs of rural and working-class communities, became one of the natural outlets for surplus military equipment in the mid-1960s. The sporting goods sections of early Walmart stores stocked practical equipment for the hunting, farming, and outdoor recreation that characterized the communities Walton was building his business to serve. A surplus military machine gun at $11.95 was, in the commercial logic of 1965, simply another piece of practical equipment. The retired farmer from Bentonville, standing before the Walmart counter with his feed and his coffee and his work gloves, understood this perfectly. He also understood something that the price card did not say and the store clerk could not know. that the weapon on the wall above the ammunition shelf had a history that no retail transaction could adequately price. The Gun Control Act of 1968 ended the Walmart machine gun counter as definitively as a battlefield ends a battle. The $11.95 price disappeared. The surplus pipeline closed. The weapons already in private hands stayed where they were, legally owned, legally kept, grandfathered under a registry that the Hughes Amendment to the Firearm Owners Protection Act of 1986 would subsequently close to new entries entirely. A transferable M1917A, one Browning machine gun, registered before May 1986, commands between $15,000 and $35,000 on today's collector market. The $11.95 Walmart purchase has become, through the arithmetic of federal legislation and 6 decades of collecting, one of the most extraordinary retail transactions in American history. Return to that Tuesday afternoon in Bentonville. Return to the retired farmer standing before the Walmart counter. He served on Peleliu. He knows what this weapon is, and what it did, and what it cost. Not in dollars, but in the currency that combat exacts from everyone it touches. He buys it. Of course he buys it. $11.95 for the machine gun that held the line on every American battlefield from 1917 to 1953. 5 million Browning machine guns were built. They held the Meuse-Argonne and Belleau Wood. They crossed the Pacific and held Peleliu and Iwo Jima, and every island between. They froze at Chosin and fired anyway. They ended up at Walmart for $11.95. And then the law changed, and the price card disappeared, and the machine gun that John Browning fired 20,000 rounds without a stoppage became something that no one would ever again find between the work gloves and the feed bags. John Browning demonstrated his machine gun to the Army Board in 1917 and fired 20,000 rounds without a single malfunction. They had never seen anything like it. Neither had Walmart.